Hi, I'm Nancy Bush. When we host guests in a disaster resource center, they bring their whole lives with them. This can include their experiences of domestic and sexual violence, and even ongoing legal issues related to relationship violence. So we need to be ready to support our guests and to handle complex situations with dignity and compassion. Now, before we get started, I want to mention something. I'm hoping that you'll be a comforting presence in the lives of people who've experienced violence or trauma. To do that, you'll need to pay some attention to yourself as well, and that includes during this training. We're going to touch on some intense subjects in this segment, so try to pay attention to your own response. Impacts of domestic and sexual violence have touched many of our lives, and even our whole communities. So this topic can bring up painful or stressful responses in us, and that's okay. If you need to, take a break or debrief with someone who you trust. We need to be present and calm with the survivors we encounter, and that means we need to be able to manage our own stress responses to provide the best support that we can. Today, you'll be hearing from two of the region's top experts on supporting people with experiences of sexual assault and domestic violence. Shannon Rose of Multnomah County's Youth and Family Services Division and Emmy Ritter of the Raphael House of Portland have been working with survivors for a combined 40 years, and they'll share some of their strategies and special considerations about assisting survivors in disaster resource centers. And of course, don't forget, this is part of a series all about operating disaster resource centers, and we have lots of other topics you're welcome to check out. Okay, let's go see today's experts.
Hi, I'm Shannon Rose. I'm here to help you feel as confident as possible managing domestic violence and sexual assault issues in a disaster resource center. You heard a moment ago that you're encouraged to pay attention to your own response during this discussion today, and that we need to learn to be aware of our own emotions to be able to support others. When you're actually working in a DRC, don't forget that if you're feeling uncomfortable doing something, you don't need to be the one doing it. Feel free to ask someone else to get involved. So in this segment, we'll cover a few ways that you can support the safety and well-being of domestic and sexual violence survivors during a disaster response. Be aware that domestic and sexual violence can happen to anyone. There are survivors in all communities and of every gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, ability, religion, and economic class. No two single survivors of violence will look the same or have the same life experience. Okay, let's discuss why we think about domestic and sexual violence survivors in a disaster. First, we know that natural disasters often lead to an increase of both domestic and sexual violence incidents, and that people sometimes actually use these crisis situations to victimize others. Sometimes, perpetrators even use places like the DRC to locate or stalk victims who are trying to escape abuse at their home. This is why it's so important that we keep these factors in mind and listen to survivors if they have concerns. Survivor safety is often dependent on their own privacy and on our confidentiality. So we never confirm or deny whether someone is at the DRC or give out any other personal information about our guests unless they've given us permission to do so. And we maintain confidentiality even with people who claim to be a family member or a loved one of our guest. If this comes up, you should work with the guest to safeguard their personal information. One thing you can do in this situation is to ask the guests if they'd like you to tell this person that they're there. But you can't say, oh, let me go ask them. You'll need to find a way to facilitate this without giving away the answer.
Hi, I'm Emmy Ritter. You may remember the ideas of look, listen, link that we've talked about in other segments of this series. Let's talk about how the look part in this process might lead you to some insights about DRC guests and their needs. Some survivors of violence might not seem different from anybody else, while other survivors might show some common signs of trauma. Looking for these symptoms and responding to them well could be the difference between a survivor choosing to access services and not. So what can you look for? Well, here are a few signs that you won't always see, but you might see, and also a few things you could ask or resources you can offer, depending on what you're seeing in the person. One is hypervigilance. Someone might be jumpy, constantly looking over their shoulder, watching the door, or even seeming on edge. In the case of hypervigilance, check in with the person and ask whether they're comfortable at the DRC. You could ask them, are you worried about your safety? Or is there something I can do or tell you about that might help you feel more secure? You also might see isolation or withdrawal. Sometimes survivors protect themselves by staying away from others and saying no to your help, or not wanting to connect with you and the people around them. If you're seeing some signs of isolation or withdrawal, give the guests some space when they want it, and remember that it's okay to ask them if they'd like you to check in with them later. Memory loss or memory inconsistencies can sometimes come up. It turns out that trauma affects the way our brain stores and accesses memories. Sometimes it's hard for survivors to remember things or recall what happened first, second, or third. I've run into this a few times when helping people complete paperwork. Be patient and let them know that it's okay if they can't answer certain questions, or if they just don't want to. They can always come back to you later.
Some people will have difficulty regulating their emotional responses. This has happened to a lot of us. Have you ever found yourself laughing in a sad or stressful situation? Or maybe you've reacted with anger directed at a loved one and not the stressful situation. Well, trauma can cause us to act in some strange and counterintuitive ways. For survivors, it can be even worse when the trauma is repeated. Be accepting and allow time and space for others to work through these responses. Remind each other that there's not a single right or wrong way to react to stressful situations. Here's something else I'd like you to keep in mind. It's not helpful to ask the specifics of a survivor's experience of abuse. Just clearly let them know that you believe them and that you're here to listen. It is helpful to validate a survivor's experience, and you can say something like, "I'm sorry that this has happened to you," or "That sounds really scary, and I'm glad that you shared that with me." You'll have to find the best way for you to let the other person know that you're there to listen and offer support. Survivors are experts on their own experiences, so trust that they know what will or what won't work in their own situation. So on one hand, we avoid making assumptions about what someone needs or what they should do. But on the other hand, we also avoid assuming that they know about all the resources we could connect them with or what we can do for them. So go ahead and ask them explicitly what they need and offer to share information with them, but never tell someone what they need. Being explicit is important. They may want a referral to a domestic or sexual violence advocate. They may want to move their sleeping space to a spot that feels safer for them, or they may simply want someone to listen to their story. But they might not want to be the first one to say, "I want a domestic violence advocate." And they might not even know that's something that we can do for them. So we always ask people explicitly what they need, trying to get to yes.
So here's something pretty specific that comes up pretty often. What should you do if someone tells you that they have a protective order against someone who might be out looking for them? We have another segment in this series about safety and security in the DRC. But these situations are complicated, and we need to look at each of these situations individually, maybe with a domestic violence expert. First, just thank the survivor for telling you. Let them know that you take them seriously and that you'll consult with the DRC manager about what you can do. Then you can work with the DRC manager, the survivor, and possibly a domestic violence advocate to figure out what to do. That's actually a good reminder to mention that professional domestic and sexual violence advocates are available to help. You can get contact information in your DRC manual, and depending on the situation, you can give the survivor their phone number, or you can call on your own to problem solve and get suggestions. This is what Link is all about. No one expects you to have all the answers, but you're the person's link to the resources that could help them keep safe and support their well-being. All right, so that's it for today. Remember that your own calm demeanor will impact the people you're working with at the Disaster Resource Center, both guests and staff alike. And recognize it can be hard to be calm for others in the middle of a disaster. Responding with intentional empathy, clear and direct communication, and non-judgmental compassion can go a long way. And always remember that Look, Listen, and Link is a really helpful guide when you're working with survivors of domestic and sexual violence. You're the one looking at them, you're the one who can hear them, and you're the link to every available resource. Thanks for watching.